Eleanor had always cherished the quiet afternoons in her sunlit kitchen, the smell of fresh flowers mingling with the faint aroma of simmering tea, and the gentle clatter of her utensils as she organized her day with calm precision. But today, something felt different. She hummed softly to herself, arranging the wildflowers in the vase just so, enjoying the serene solitude she rarely got since her daughter had married and life had grown busier. Yet the peaceful rhythm of her routine was interrupted by an unexpected knock on the door that made her heart skip a beat. A knock she hadn't anticipated, not today, not when the day seemed ordinary, a knock that brought a strange flutter to her chest she couldn't quite place, and as she wiped her hands nervously on her apron and approached the door, she felt a curious tension rising, a sensation she hadn't experienced in a long time, a mix of surprise, curiosity, and something unfamiliar, almost thrilling, like the air itself had changed in an instant, carrying with it a subtle promise of something she could not yet define. When she opened the door, there he was, Daniel, her daughter's husband, standing there with a polite smile that seemed slightly forced, holding a small box of pastries, and Eleanor's pulse quickened, though she barely understood why, as if his presence had already shifted the ordinary world she had been comfortably inhabiting, and she noticed the way his eyes lingered just a moment too long, a warmth there that made the kitchen feel suddenly smaller, more intimate, and even as she forced a polite greeting, she could feel her hands shaking lightly, betraying the calm she tried to project, while Daniel cleared his throat and said softly, "I thought I'd stop by." His voice casual but with a subtle hesitation, almost like he too felt the unusual tension in the room, and Eleanor stepped aside to let him in, her mind spinning with thoughts she hadn't expected to confront, thoughts about him, about herself, about boundaries and feelings she had never acknowledged until now. The late autumn breeze drifted in behind him, brushing against the corners of the kitchen and carrying with it a chill that contrasted strangely with the warmth rising in her chest, and she noticed the way his coat smelled faintly of cologne and wood smoke, comforting yet stirring something deep inside her, a curious mixture of nostalgia, longing, and an unspoken connection that seemed to thread between them in invisible lines, fragile yet undeniable. As Daniel set the box of pastries on the counter, arranging them carefully as if choosing to linger there longer than necessary, while Eleanor busied herself with pouring tea, her movements automatic but her mind racing, noticing every detail, from the way his fingers brushed against the edge of the counter to the faint catch in his breath as he looked around, like he was seeing her home through fresh eyes, or perhaps noticing her in ways that she hadn't realized she could be noticed. They exchanged small talk at first about the weather, about her daughter's day, about trivial matters that barely masked the undercurrent of something more profound, an electric tension that neither could name but both could feel, and Eleanor felt a strange thrill in hearing him laugh softly at a joke she barely remembered telling, a sound that seemed to vibrate against the walls of her chest, making her heart beat faster, making her aware of every line of his face, every subtle gesture, every quiet nuance of his presence that seemed to linger in the room long after he moved. And even as she handed him a cup of tea, their fingers brushed, and Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her that she could not explain, a gentle shock that left her momentarily breathless, as if the universe itself had conspired to create this single fleeting connection, fragile and ephemeral, yet infinitely meaningful. And she caught herself staring at him for longer than propriety should allow, noticing the light in his eyes, the faint smile that hinted at thoughts unspoken, and the way he seemed to hesitate, lingering in the kitchen in a manner that suggested he had chosen to stay, if only for a moment, in this space that had always been hers alone, yet now seemed charged with possibility. She tried to remind herself of boundaries, of her daughter, of the social norms that governed such interactions, yet the pull was undeniable, a gravitational force that made her chest ache and her mind spin with possibilities she could not articulate, a pull that seemed to intensify as Daniel reached for the tea, their eyes meeting for just a heartbeat, and in that instant, the room felt suspended in time, the sunlight streaming through the window casting soft patterns across the counter, the ticking clock on the wall seeming to slow, and Eleanor felt as if the ordinary world had receded, leaving only the two of them in this suspended electric moment, where words were unnecessary and the silence spoke volumes, and she realized with a jolt that she had been longing for something she couldn't name, something that had been missing in her life for longer than she cared to admit, and now in this quiet sunlit kitchen, it had arrived unannounced, unexpected, and entirely uncontainable. Daniel's voice broke through the reverie, polite and casual, asking if she had baked anything new, and Eleanor found herself laughing lightly, her nerves calming just enough to allow the warmth of connection to settle around them like a gentle blanket. Yet the tension remained, a delicate undercurrent as he began to talk about mundane things. Yet somehow every word, every glance, every smile carried a subtle weight, an intimacy that neither of them could fully acknowledge, and Eleanor's heart beat in a rhythm that mirrored the soft clinking of the teaspoons against their cups, a rhythm both calming and alarming, as if the simple act of sharing tea could carry the weight of emotions they had neither the courage nor the reason to name. She noticed how he moved in the kitchen, careful not to touch too much, yet the subtle proximity was enough to make her aware of every nuance of his presence, of the heat in the air, of the fragile tension that hovered, delicate yet insistent, and she realized with a startling clarity that this ordinary afternoon had transformed into something extraordinary, charged with possibility. And though she knew boundaries must be respected, though she knew propriety demanded restraint, she could not ignore the surge of emotions, the quiet thrill, the unexpected connection that had been ignited in this sunlit kitchen. And as Daniel glanced at her with that faint, almost imperceptible smile, Eleanor felt a shiver of anticipation, of curiosity, of longing she hadn't felt in years, and she knew, without admitting it aloud, that this moment, this unexpected visit, would linger in her mind far longer than the pastries on the counter, far longer than the tea in their cups, a memory suspended between reality and desire, delicate, fragile, beautiful, and entirely unforgettable, a quiet promise of emotions unspoken and connections felt, a moment that neither of them could have planned but that neither would ever forget. And as the sunlight shifted across the floor, casting shadows that danced like whispered secrets, Eleanor realized with a soft, inward sigh that life had changed, just a little, in ways she could not yet comprehend, and that the unexpected knock on the door had opened a door within her own heart that she hadn't realized was closed. And in that quiet, tender, slightly charged afternoon, Eleanor and Daniel shared a moment that would echo far beyond the simple walls of her kitchen, a moment of warmth, of connection, of the thrill of the unexpected, delicate and fleeting, yet impossibly vivid in the memory it had already begun to create as the afternoon sunlight poured through the kitchen window. Daniel sipped his tea quietly, and Eleanor found herself studying him, noticing the subtle changes in his expressions, the slight furrow of his brow as he listened, the way his fingers lingered on the cup longer than necessary, a gentle warmth radiating from them, a warmth that made her heart beat faster even as she tried to remain composed. The room was filled with the faint scent of pastries mingling with tea, but it was the silent moments between their words that weighed heaviest, the pauses that seemed to stretch endlessly, carrying with them unspoken thoughts and emotions that neither dared articulate yet both felt, and Eleanor was keenly aware of the subtle tension, the delicate interplay of familiarity and distance, the gentle brush of his presence that made the ordinary kitchen feel transformed into a space charged with something beyond mere politeness, beyond casual conversation, and she realized she had been longing for connection, for attention, for the quiet acknowledgement of another person seeing her for who she truly was, and now it was here, embodied in the man who by all rights should have remained just her son-in-law, but instead stood there as someone she could not ignore, someone who stirred emotions she thought she had long buried, feelings of attraction and curiosity, a fragile spark that demanded to be noticed. Daniel cleared his throat, attempting to break the quiet, speaking of mundane matters first, the weather, the garden, her daughter's day. Yet Eleanor felt the weight behind each word, the subtle significance of how he lingered near the counter, his gaze occasionally flicking toward her in moments too brief for casual scrutiny but long enough to send an unexpected thrill racing through her chest. And as she responded politely, keeping her voice steady, she found herself smiling more freely than usual, laughing lightly at jokes that seemed almost inconsequential yet carried with them an intimacy she had not anticipated. And with every exchange, the unspoken grew, a current of longing threading through their words, threading through the pauses, threading through the quiet brush of hands and accidental glances, a silent dialogue that neither fully acknowledged yet both understood on a deeper level, the kind of understanding that comes not from conversation but from shared presence and subtle attentiveness. Eleanor poured another cup of tea and passed it to Daniel, their fingers brushing briefly, a contact electric enough to make her stomach flutter, enough to make her heart race, enough to make the simple act of sharing tea feel laden with meaning, and she realized how much she had missed being noticed, being appreciated, being seen not just as a mother or a host but as a woman whose presence mattered, whose smile could carry significance, whose thoughts could be valued, and Daniel's quiet attentiveness brought that realization to the surface with a clarity that both surprised and unsettled her. And yet, it was not just admiration she felt. It was a gentle stir of longing, a recognition of possibility, a faint thrill of imagining what connection could be if only circumstance were different, and Eleanor chastised herself for letting her mind wander, for allowing herself to feel something she knew could not be, for noticing a spark in a relationship that was meant to be defined by propriety, respect, and distance. But no matter how firmly she tried to ground herself, the pull of that spark was undeniable, subtle yet persistent, and it colored every gesture, every glance, every slight movement Daniel made. He leaned casually against the counter at one point, yet there was a tension in his posture, a restraint in the way he spoke, a carefulness in the tone of his voice, all of which suggested he too was navigating emotions he did not intend to reveal, and Eleanor felt a mixture of relief and disappointment, relief that he maintained respect, disappointment that the air between them was charged with unspoken understanding, the kind that makes ordinary interactions feel electric, makes time stretch, makes moments seem larger than they are. And she caught herself stealing glances at him, noticing the way sunlight fell on his hair, the faint curve of his lips when he smiled, the thoughtful crease of his forehead when he listened, and she realized she was memorizing these small details, committing them to memory in a way she did not usually allow herself to do with others, and the realization startled her because it meant she was investing emotionally in a moment that should have been fleeting, investing in a connection that should have remained distant, and yet the warmth between them, the quiet intimacy of shared space, the gentle acknowledgement of each other's presence made it impossible to step back entirely, impossible to dismiss the feelings that had quietly begun to bloom within her. And as they continued to converse, Daniel paused mid-sentence, and for a brief second, the words were caught somewhere between his mind and his mouth, leaving a pregnant silence that Eleanor felt deep in her chest, a moment loaded with anticipation, with questions neither dared ask, with thoughts left dangling in the air like a tender secret neither could voice. Eleanor's mind raced with what-ifs, with boundaries, with longing, with restraint, all jumbled together in a way that made her pulse quicken, her breathing shallow, her awareness of every detail of Daniel's presence sharpened to an almost unbearable clarity, and she noted how carefully he sipped his tea, how he adjusted the box of pastries slightly on the counter, how he shifted just enough to face her without crossing any physical boundary, a careful dance of respect and attention, and she found herself mesmerized, caught in the rhythm of this unspoken dance, feeling both exhilarated and guilty at the same time, caught between desire and propriety, between admiration and restraint, between curiosity and the knowledge of what was proper, and yet, the pull of the connection was magnetic, almost impossible to ignore, a current running beneath the surface of ordinary conversation, making each moment linger longer, making each glance hold more meaning than it ought, making each subtle gesture carry emotional weight that neither of them could articulate but both could feel acutely, and Eleanor realized with a shiver that this afternoon, this simple quiet encounter, had transformed into something far more significant than a casual visit, that the kitchen, the sunlight, the tea, the pastries and Daniel's presence had woven together to create a moment she would not forget, a moment that would remain etched in her memory with clarity and intensity, a delicate mixture of longing, restraint, curiosity and unspoken emotion, a memory suspended between reality and the possibility of what might have been, had circumstances been different. Daniel laughed softly at something she said, a gentle sound that echoed in the space between them, and Eleanor felt a sudden rush of warmth, a shiver of anticipation, a heartbeat of exhilaration that made her stomach flutter, and she knew in that instant that she was both captivated and terrified. Captivated by the quiet intensity of his presence, terrified by the awareness of boundaries, by the knowledge of what could never be, and yet unable to deny the thrill, the spark, the connection that had quietly taken root, a connection that neither words nor actions could fully define, but a connection that was undeniable, irresistible, and profoundly stirring. And as they sat together, sipping tea, sharing light conversation, stealing glances, feeling the subtle brush of presence, Eleanor realized that this afternoon would remain with her long after Daniel had left, that the memory of the quiet intimacy, the soft smiles, the unspoken acknowledgement, the gentle warmth of his presence, would linger in her mind, her heart, and her imagination, coloring every memory of the day with a delicate tension, a gentle longing, a quietly burning curiosity, a soft ache of something both forbidden and alluring. And as Daniel finally rose to leave, Pausing at the doorway with that subtle, almost imperceptible smile, Eleanor felt a shiver of both relief and disappointment. Relief that the moment had passed without complication. Disappointment that the magic of connection, the thrill of shared presence, the delicate spark of unspoken understanding, had ended for now, leaving her to sit alone in the kitchen, the sunlight fading, the tea cooling, the pastries untouched, the memory of his visit lingering like a gentle echo, a reminder of a moment that had transformed an ordinary afternoon into something extraordinary, charged with emotion, loaded with possibility, and impossible to forget. And Eleanor knew with a deep, quiet certainty that the memory of this encounter, the warmth, the glances, the laughter, the silence, the brush of fingers, and the fragile tension that had hovered between them, would continue to occupy her thoughts, her heart, her imagination, until they met again, until another unexpected visit, until another moment where the ordinary would transform into the extraordinary, leaving her both captivated and unsettled, longing and restrained, exhilarated and contemplative, a tangle of emotions she could neither untangle nor fully express, a moment suspended between reality and the possibilities that life, fate, and quiet human connection sometimes offer, delicate, fleeting, unforgettable, and entirely hers. The afternoon light had begun to soften, casting long warm streaks across the kitchen floor, and Eleanor found herself standing near the counter, trying to steady her racing thoughts, trying to calm the unusual flutter in her chest. But every movement, every sound seemed amplified now, as if the room itself had grown alive with the weight of the moments she had shared with Daniel, and she realized that this encounter had shifted something inside her, something subtle yet undeniable, a delicate awareness of connection, longing, and curiosity that made ordinary gestures feel electric, like a simple glance or the faint brush of hands carried more significance than they had any right to. Yet the awareness was impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss, and as Daniel began to rise from his chair to leave, Eleanor felt an unexpected pang, a sharp tug in her chest that made her pause, watching the way he moved, noting the careful grace in his posture, the faint hesitation in his steps, the almost imperceptible smile that played on his lips, a smile that seemed to carry layers of meaning she could not fully name but could feel in the depth of her heart. And in that brief moment, the kitchen felt suspended in time again, every detail etched in clarity. From the soft sunlight filtering through the window to the faint aroma of tea and pastries lingering in the air, to the gentle hum of life outside the walls, yet all of it seemed secondary to the quiet intensity of their shared presence, a presence that had woven itself into something fragile, intimate, and profoundly moving. Eleanor's mind raced as she attempted to process the whirlwind of emotions coursing through her, a mixture of admiration, longing, restraint, and guilt, the knowledge of boundaries warring with the undeniable pull she felt toward Daniel, and she realized that the simplicity of his visit had revealed a complexity of feeling she hadn't anticipated, a depth of emotion that both exhilarated and frightened her, a recognition of a connection that had been quietly building beneath polite conversation and casual gestures, growing with each glance, each pause, each shared word, until it had become undeniable, palpable, a quiet tension hovering in the space between them. Like an unspoken promise, Daniel paused at the doorway, his hand lingering lightly on the frame, his gaze meeting hers with a weight that made Eleanor's stomach twist in ways she could not explain, a look that seemed to say everything and nothing at once, a delicate acknowledgement of emotions neither of them could voice but both felt, and she found herself leaning slightly forward without realizing it, drawn by the magnetic pull of the moment, by the quiet intensity of his presence, by the subtle power of a connection that had taken root in the most ordinary of settings, and she felt a rush of warmth, of anticipation of something tender and fragile, a mix of exhilaration and longing that made her breath catch in her throat. He spoke softly, almost a whisper, "I'll come by again soon," and the simplicity of the words belied their significance, carrying with them the weight of emotion, of possibility, of a shared understanding that had quietly formed between them, and Eleanor felt her heart lift, flutter, and ache all at once, the delicate tension between them both thrilling and terrifying, the realization of what could be and the knowledge of what could never fully be tangled together in a bittersweet swirl of feeling, leaving her both captivated and conflicted, her mind and body acutely aware of the intimacy of the moment and the boundaries that must be respected. As Daniel stepped out, closing the door behind him, Eleanor leaned against it, a soft sigh escaping her lips, the empty kitchen suddenly filled with the echoes of his presence, the memory of his voice, his glance, the gentle weight of his attention, all lingering in the air like a tender fragrance that refused to fade, and she realized that the ordinary afternoon had been transformed into an extraordinary memory, a moment that would live in her mind with vivid intensity, a delicate tapestry woven of warmth, unspoken longing, gentle curiosity, and the quiet thrill of connection, a tapestry that would linger in her heart, coloring every quiet afternoon, every cup of tea, every glance she shared with others, with a subtle ache for what could not be and an appreciation for what had been, even if only fleeting. Eleanor walked slowly to the window, staring out at the fading sunlight, thinking of Daniel, the way he had moved, the way he had looked at her, the subtle care in his gestures, the restrained intensity in his voice, and she felt a quiet shiver of anticipation, a whisper of hope and a gentle sorrow, knowing that life must continue, that propriety must be maintained, that boundaries must be honored, yet her heart was undeniably marked by the encounter, the memory of warmth and connection lingering like a soft, persistent glow, a reminder that moments of beauty and tenderness often arise in the most unexpected ways and leave a mark far beyond the time they occupy. She recalled the delicate tension in the air, the brief silence filled with unspoken emotion, the gentle brush of fingers over the edge of the teacup, the faint laughter that had echoed softly in the room, all of it blending into a memory that felt both fragile and intense, a perfect moment suspended between reality and imagination, between longing and restraint, between desire and propriety, and Eleanor realized that she had never experienced a quiet intimacy like this, never felt a connection so subtle yet so profound, and she marveled at how life could deliver such fleeting, perfect moments in ordinary settings, moments that could touch the soul, stir the heart, and leave a lingering warmth that defied explanation. She imagined him walking down the path away from her door, the crisp air brushing against his coat, the subtle scent of his cologne lingering in her mind, and she felt the odd combination of relief and disappointment, relief that the encounter had remained innocent, polite, and respectful, disappointment that it had ended so soon, that the moment of shared understanding and warmth was no longer tangible, and yet she recognized the beauty in its transience, the delicacy of a connection formed in a quiet kitchen, in the light of a soft afternoon, a connection that had stirred emotions she hadn't dared to name, a connection that had revealed longing and tenderness she had kept buried, and in that recognition, Eleanor felt a profound appreciation for the depth of feeling that human interactions could carry, for the subtle ways connection could manifest, for the quiet intensity that could exist even without words or declarations, for the delicate dance of emotion and restraint that life sometimes offered. As the room returned to quiet, Eleanor moved back to the counter, touching the edge of the vase she had arranged earlier, the petals of the flowers catching the last sunlight, and she reflected on the way Daniel had lingered, the way his presence had filled the space without overwhelming it, the way the ordinary afternoon had become extraordinary, the way a simple visit had left her heart fluttering and her mind racing, and she knew, with a soft inward smile, that this memory would remain with her, a gentle echo of connection, intimacy, and emotional resonance, a reminder of the unexpected ways life could stir the heart. And as she sipped the now cooling tea, Eleanor allowed herself to savor the lingering warmth, the memory of his glance, the thrill of the unspoken, the delicate ache of longing and propriety intertwined, knowing that even though the moment had passed, the emotional imprint it had left was permanent, a quiet treasure to carry forward, a testament to the subtle beauty of human connection, the gentle power of presence, the tender resonance of shared silence, and the extraordinary emotions that could bloom from an ordinary afternoon, leaving her heart open, her mind alert, and her soul quietly humming with the memory of something both fleeting and unforgettable, a perfect balance of longing, warmth, restraint, and anticipation that would linger until another unexpected visit, another fleeting moment, another chance for ordinary life to reveal extraordinary emotional depth, and Eleanor felt the quiet satisfaction of having experienced something rare, delicate, and profoundly moving, a memory of connection, emotional resonance, and the understated thrill of human intimacy that was timeless, unforgettable, and entirely her own.